71. So I called him and asked him how it felt to live in the hottest part of the country. Dan is giving me my stage instructions. We got a couple more minutes and then we'll get rolling. Let me go back up to.
Hello, Chet. Good morning.
Good morning.
I got
or good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Yes,
actually.
good afternoon. I got my micro on the phone.
All right. Woo-hoo.
Ooh. And for the ones who are with us, thanks for joining us. It is so funny to be on live and have all of the buttons in this backup.
That's great. I still have to, you and I need to get together and do the intro for the YouTube thing.
Yes, I would love to do it and have some words with you to remember the 4th anniversary and get to start to upload all of the records that we have.
Yeah.
Yes, it will be so nice.
Okay. I've got time this weekend. So if you've got some time, let me know. If not, we can do it another day.
Yes. I will let you know how is your days to visit you and get the video, the live video.
Yeah, we've got classes this weekend, right?
Yes, we have on Saturday.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Okay,
right.
well, Osmo's ready. Thank you to Antonia, Cecilia. Hello, Cecis. Gerardo Mendez, Hans, thanks for joining us. Itzel, Knox, hello, Knox. Luis, good to see you. And Oscar, thanks.
Excellent.
Thanks. Okay.
I'm just waiting for Apple to say it's 12:15.
Yes, 12:15.
There we go. All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Apex for Lunch for May. Today is May 26, 2022. We're almost halfway through the year. Holy cow! It seems like it just got started. Maybe I'm still hungover from New Year's. Anyway, today we're calling the session "Baby Don't Cry." If you've been watching any news at all, you know about the problems that we had with baby food formula here in the U.S. I find it very interesting that whole families are streaming into Juarez again to buy groceries because apparently there's no problem getting this in any other country, but here we seem to have a problem. So we're going to talk about that because it on the surface it seems like, oh well, but deeper down it shows us some really significant problems, and so we'll talk about that. Okay, the pandemic is still with us. You can see that so far this year we've gone from let me put an end to this. Well, I'd hope to put an end to it. Anyway, the going rate is going back up again. we've seen 521.3 million people infected. That's reported. Here in the US, it's 83.6 million reported. And you can see that we're 5 months into the year, but there's been 20 million, 21 million more infections this year. So that's roughly 7% of our population has been infected in the first 5 months of this year. So something's not quite right in the way we're coming at this. We've gone above 1 million deaths. Another 160,000 have died. So we're saying, well, it's stable. It's going away. We don't have to wear masks anymore. And the numbers don't bear that out. My wife has an issue, and so I wear my mask whenever I'm out. And I suggest that if you've had any issues or you want to avoid getting the B2 or whichever variant is around, and I guess now there are 3 other variants that are being tracked here in the area, then put on a mask. It's not that big a deal. This is a note. I don't know how many of you know this. I put it in here because Voyager 1 has started sending back some crazy talk from where it is. It's currently 22 light hours away from the Earth. It is sailing away from the sun. It has left our solar system and it is in what we call deep space. And all of a sudden it started talking about its orientation and where it's pointing. And it's giving them data that's a little untoward. The reason I put it in here is you may not know that many of the components that are in Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 were made here in El Paso. Alan Bradley made the carbon composition resistors with gold bleeds that went into a resistor network that they're using as part of the control logic for Voyager 1. And so a small piece of El Paso is now currently 22 light hours away and still going. They had no idea when they shot these 2 things off. They had no idea how long they were going to last or how far they'd go. The thought was, and what they did, and you may remember this from the Star Trek adventures, that they would put them out there and at some point they would be found out in space. And they have gold records on them and some pictographic instructions on how to view them and use them. And they provided information about Earth and where we are and the things that we're doing. So anyway, I just thought I'd catch up on that if you haven't been staying in touch. Shanghai remains closed. Sometimes I sit here and I'm in my own little world and I completely forget what's going on around me. A close friend of mine had sent me a note some time back and said, yeah, I'm going to China for a little while. And I had forgotten about it completely. He's going there for 2 years. He's actually been there for almost 6 months now, and he is locked down. So I asked him, I said, Jose Antonio, what's it like? And he said, he is in a room that is like a small hotel room, and he is unable to leave that room. Now, the 1st of June, they're saying they're going to let him out. He'll be able to move around a little bit, and they'll slowly relax the restrictions. But for the last 2 or 3 months, he has been locked in his little tiny room. He's got access to the internet. He's still working. He works for Lear, and he's still working, but it's not at all what he expected. So the ports have been shut down, and now they're going to restart, but everything else has been shut down as well. And so there is some amount of freight in transit that was stopped in transit and will now be loaded onto ships and will be shipped out. But the normal performance of the operations, the manufacturing, won't get up and completely normal, their word, not mine, for probably 3, maybe 4 months. And so then the question that raises is, well, if you project out 4 more months, that takes you to September. And we know that in September, October, the Christmas stuff starts coming in. And that's where we see the really big bottlenecks on the West Coast. So are we looking forward to another big bottleneck where it takes a while to get things rolling? Once they get it rolling, it all ends up sitting, waiting to get unloaded. And I don't think that's going to happen this time. I think it'll get worse, but I don't think it's going to get that bad. And there are a couple of things that play into that. This was something else that was in the news the other day, and I chased it out to see exactly what if it was what I thought it was, and it is. Walmart is reducing their prices. Walmart is we all know they sell at a low price, and they sell high volume, and because of that, they make a lot of money. But for the first time in a long time, their stock value dropped. And it dropped because people thought that their sales were going to tank. Their inventory is quite high. They have unloaded all of those shiploads of stuff that were hanging up, and they've cleaned that backlog of material out of the supply chain coming in, and they find that they've got a huge amount of inventory. So they're reducing their prices as an incentive to sell more product. But it's also to start reducing that inventory and get the cost down, because financing is going to get tighter, and that's going to drive the costs up. So they're doing that. At the same time, Amazon is asking their employees to take time off. You don't feel like working today? Take the rest of the day off. You don't feel like coming in tomorrow? Don't come in. Why? Because they've got more employees than they have work to do right now. There's been a significant drop in the amount of material that's being shipped on Amazon. So Amazon is trying to figure out how to balance that with the labor they have. So then the question, tying back to the previous slide, how much that will come out of Shanghai will be needed when it gets here? Are we going to be offloading stuff from the ships that we really don't need? Is it all excess inventory? Something to think about. You're talking about millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars of excess inventory. What's that going to do to companies that deal in inventory management like Walmart? Just to throw another log on the fire, there's a new ship coming out. Actually, we've got a picture of it in the next slide. It's called the A4L, which I just thought was wonderful. It's the next big one. It will handle more than 24,000 TEU. Now, the TEU, just to re-explain, that's the 20-foot container. So it would handle 24,000 20-foot containers if it was just packed with 20-foot containers. We put a lot of 40-footers and others on there, so that reduces the total number. But if you put it all in 40-footers, that's still 12,000 containers. It takes 6,000 rail cars to move that single load off the ship. 12,000 semi-trailers if we were to load that all onto tractor trailers and move them on the interstate. They haven't said specifically, it's going to be above that. So it's going to be more than 24,000. They haven't figured out exactly how much they're going to put on. It's the cutting edge, but the thing is, it still takes a long time to unload and reload. And they get, it moves stuff a lot more cheaply because it's a new ship. It works, it has fuel controls on it. They use sails to a certain degree to help it along. They do all these different things to cut the costs, and they save money doing that. So it costs them less to ship, but it takes forever. And this reminded me very much of batch manufacturing, where you look at what your demand is and you say, well, yeah, my demand's only 10, but I always make this in batches of 1,000. So I'm going to make a batch of 1,000, and you feed this 1,000-piece batch through the factory when all you really needed was 10 pieces. So looking at that and thinking about that, what's going to happen here as we move forward with the shipping companies? Well, we see that over the 50 years, and thank Deanna for the graphic, you can see here the forward hull of the Ever a Lot. That's a damn big boat. And you can see down here, 2020, 24,000 TEU, and you can see how that scales all the way back up, where you had back in the 1980s, they were moving 4,000 TEU, and now we've grown that to 24 or more TEU. So huge, huge ships carrying huge amounts of cargo. What's happening with the shipping companies? Well, the larger ships can carry at a lower cost per TEU. So the smaller shippers can't compete. So the smaller shippers started going out of business. I wondered what had happened to Nanjing. I had noticed that I had seen their containers, but I hadn't seen anything about them. And the problem is that they failed financially. And so did about 30 other shipping companies. They were smaller and they didn't have the money to go out and buy those big ships. And because of that, they got priced out. The bigger ships could offer the work at a lower price, doing the batch work, and the smaller ships couldn't compete. So there were three major shippers that emerged out of this, and then they started raising their prices. And so this year, they're on track to make about $300 billion. That's the three major shippers. So what does that mean? Well, that says you've been getting cheap shipments coming out of China for some time now, but that price is going to go up. And they'll say it's fuel, or they'll say it's something else. But if you're looking at shipping, the price is going to go up, and they're going to make a lot of money. So is there good news in all of this? And the answer is yes. The orders for smaller ships have increased considerably for delivery in 2023 and 2024. There are companies out there that are making the bet that the big ones are going to price themselves too high, and people will start looking for, because it's going to take a long time for those big ships. It takes them longer to load, they cross, it takes them longer to unload, and they have to sit and wait for docking space on both ends of the trip. So it takes longer to get your stuff. And companies are going to want to get it, and price is not a competition point at this point because they've priced themselves way high. So with price not being an issue, companies are going to start wanting faster service. If you're going to pay for a high price for freight, you might as well get it faster. And so the orders for smaller ships are out there, and they're increasing. And there are other companies that are going to be coming up who will be competing, but they'll be competing and moving into smaller ports. They won't necessarily have to get into Long Beach or LA. They'll be able to go into Oakland. They'll be able to go into Seattle, Tacoma. They'll be able to go into Ensenada and some of the other ports in Mexico. So this is going to put a competitive edge back into shipping product. So it'll be interesting to see how this works out through the rest of this year and into next year. Now, I mentioned the baby formula at the beginning. Mostly comes from Abbott Labs, and they had a problem with the outbound quality of a special formula they make for babies that can't digest cow's milk. It's part of the big formula thing, but the initial problem started with a specific formulation. The problem started about 2 years ago when contaminated formula or babies got sick, and they believed it came from contaminated formula, but they couldn't find the bacteria in the formula that would have made the baby sick. And so because of the pandemic and everything, the FDA sort of backed off and said, okay, we'll wait and see what happens. In January of this year, they told Abbott that because things were changing with the pandemic, they were going back to visits. And so they were going to come and visit the Abbott plant. And at about the same time, well, they went and they found that the Abbott plant did not meet their standards for cleanliness. They had leaks in the roof, and water was coming through the roof and down and was pooling and collecting on the machines and on the floor in different areas of the plant. So they said, this is not acceptable. At the same time, they found that there was more tainted material within the Abbott plant. Now, if you read the news, Abbott says they never shipped any tainted material out of their plant. They don't argue the point that there was tainted material and it was in their plant. They're just saying it never went out the door. So that can't be proven one way or the other. And they did the recall to avoid litigation. So they pulled it back. So they've recalled that product. It may or may not have been tainted, but they shut down the operation. And this is where the problem festered, because they didn't bother to clean up the mess, and they didn't bother to start the process back up. The FDA said, we shut them down, we're good, that's all we need to worry about, and they moved away. So the question is, why did they not restart? Well, it could be that it's a smaller line, it was expensive, they didn't see the need, or they may have been maneuvering to put a shortage in the marketplace so that they could drive the price up and make it more profitable. Don't know. We're not inside. But the finger pointing has gone in all directions on this thing. Abbott is saying it's an FDA problem and it's overreach by the government. FDA is saying, no, it's an Abbott thing and so on. But in the meantime, we've got a whole bunch of kids who can't get the nutrition they need. And so we're now flying baby food or baby formula from Switzerland and from the UK in to replenish the shelves. This points out another issue where there was a lack of competition. The other people who make formula did not compete with Abbott on this particular formula. And why was there no competition? Because they felt that there was no way they could break into that market. The FDA, when you're starting a new product, is very, very strict. They felt that Abbott had been doing this for a long time, knew their way around the whole process, and they just wouldn't be able to compete. And so that no one else was digging in and saying, hey, let us go and get this. Is that going to change? Don't know. but this is something to watch. Where else in your supply chain do you have some major players who could do something similar? They could ship material that wasn't up to spec, but there's no competition. And you find yourself almost single or sole sourced. So you need to look at that. Single source is when you choose to only have one. Sole source means there is only one. So what are you doing, and how are your products sourced? And is this a potential problem for you? Not necessarily with the FDA, but with your suppliers. Do you have this problem? We ask what, where, when, how, and why when we're doing root cause analysis. We don't ask who, because we don't want to blame the individual operator. But this is a systemic failure. And systemic failures are process driven. And so the question that we have when we look at this is, which system failed? Or did all of the systems fail? Abbott failed. Did the FDA fail? Quite likely. If they do an investigation into this, I think they're going to find a whole lot of different parts of the process failed. Why? And so that's where we go. Where's the root cause to all of this? It's going to be fun to watch. It's going to be fun to see how that works out. We were asked by one of your peers to talk a little bit about lead time reductions and how can we get lead time reductions. And basically, for lead time reductions, there are three tools that we fall back on. And the first is the value stream map, and then we use flow charts, and then we do an analysis of weight and queue and inventory and see where we can take out the parts that are slowing us down. So how does that work? Here we've got the current state map for a value stream map. And if you've not seen this before, you start with the customer there in the upper right-hand corner, and how do they transmit their orders to get to the planning departments within your company? And then from there, how do you contact and plan your raw materials through your raw material suppliers? And then how do you manage communication to the shop floor to manufacture? And you diagram this out. Now, to get the rough cut on this might take you maybe a day, probably no more than 3 or 4 hours, but maybe a day. And you do this. You set up the little triangles there, and they have the eye in them. Those are inventory. So the raw material comes into the inventory. It's there for 10 days. It goes through operation 1, and then it sits and waits for 10 days until it runs into operation 2, and then it's in inventory for 5 days and goes to operation 3. Then it goes in transit out to your distribution, and then it sits in distribution for 10 or 12 days, 10 days, and then 2 days of in transit out to the customer. So when you look at this at the bottom here, you've got the entire timeline for this thing. You've got 10 days and then 30 minutes of activity, 10 more days, and 5 minutes of activity, 5 days, and then 15 minutes of activity, 1 day, and then 12 days of sitting still. So your lead time for this is 53 days. Your processing time is 50 minutes. So your value added percentage here is 0.002%. So where do you look? Well, you look at those big 10-day things and you say, okay, why do we have 10 days between operation 1 and operation 2? Why do we have 5 days between operation 2 and operation 3? And we can start squeezing those down. We can also look to see what's our lead time. We give the raw material supplier a 110-day forecast and weekly orders. Do they keep up? Do we need to look at that? How do we reduce the time out to the customer? And how do we collapse this? Where do we go to find that? Well, the answer to that comes from looking at our flow charts of each of our supply chains. Now, I say each of our supply chains because normally when we talk about one supply chain, when we go back to this one, we're only talking one raw material supplier and how it comes into our process. We may have 50 raw material suppliers coming into the process. If we're making, this is for Coca-Cola. It could be Pepsi too, but we did this as a part of a project for Coca-Cola. If you look at the one that starts there in the upper left-hand corner, it says mine, and then mill, smelter, hot roll, cold roll, can maker to the bottler. That's the can. You have the cornfield, the corn storage, caramel plant, caramel storage, and the essence plant. That is the color and the flavor. And then you got beet sugar. You got the beets and the beet sugar that gets processed. That makes it sweeter. And then back when we did this, they were using cardboard flats, about 2 inches tall and around 24 bottles or 24 cans. And so we had the carton plant and the carton warehouse and all of that. You have to go through that whole thing and then say, which of these suppliers is the slow one and what lethargy is there? When we looked at the cans, we went back and tracked that out, and it was 300, I believe it's 356. It was just short of a year from the time they mine the bauxite until it gets consumed at your house is 356 days of supply chain time. So we look at that and we say, okay, we want to reduce it. How much do we want to reduce it? What's competitive and how much do we want to do? And how can we do that? And so we have to do flow charts on this, take a look. If we're going to do flow charts internally, then we can do more detailed flow charts and we can see where things start, where things stop, where they rest. And we can start looking at how we're going to fix that. Here's the detail behind that can supply. I'm sorry that it got misaligned when I moved it out of its native state. I'm sorry, it was 319 days. I moved it out of its native state and brought it into this format. But anyway, there's the detail that we ran through with this. And we looked at what was the cumulative lead time, 319 days. And the actual process time was like 2 or 3 days. It was minimal. So you do this detail and you do the analysis of weight and queue and inventory on hand. And so here's where you see the cum days and the finished goods storage at each operation. So at the mine, they have 14 days. And at the reduction mill, they have 14 days of raw storage and 14 days of finished goods. And at the smelter, they have 3 months of the stuff that you're holding 14 days at the reduction mill. The smelter's got 3 months of that stuff sitting there, and then it processes and it has 14 days of finished goods and so on. And you look at this and you've got redundant inventories all the way through the process. It should be an easy thing to go back to this process and start getting it and moving it forward and getting it under control. One of the interesting things was the can maker. The can maker for the Coca-Cola plant here is in Tucson, and they form the can, paint the can, load the can on a trailer, and each trailer is approximately 4 hours of time. And so they have one trailer being unloaded here, one trailer waiting to be unloaded here, and then one 4 hours out and one just ready to leave Tucson. And so they keep that part of it pretty much in line. They've made some changes, and these numbers have changed. They've come down pretty dramatically over the last 3 or 4 years. I need to go back and redo that study, but That'll take a couple of days. Anyway, that's the story. You can do this with your own supply chains. It's not that difficult. You can get some of the data. You may not be able to get all of the data. You may not be able to go back as far. That's okay. Look at what's going on between you and the next person, and then talk to them and what goes on between them and their supplier, and how can we make that smoother. That'll reduce your lead time. Look in-house. How many batch operations do you have? And see if you can get those reduced. Smaller batches move faster. Okay, any questions? Anything you want to add? Put it in the chat or send it off to Deanna or to me, and we'll work it in. We'll try and answer your questions. All right, have a good long weekend if you're in the US this weekend. Enjoy the weather, and we'll get back together in June. Bye.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chet.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you, you too, guys.
Sorry. I love it.
I need a better example or easier to understand, to be honest. And you know, for Coca-Cola, probably is not the best option for me.
I'll try and get one together for you on a good beer. How's that?
Great. See you.
Okay. Have a good week.